ask you something. When you hear the word climate change, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Melting glaciers, raising rising temperatures, floods, and droughts. What if I tell you that climate change is not only about the environment, but it is about and it is also about the people, about about who has the power to adapt, who has the resources to survive, and perhaps most importantly, who pays the price for a problem they may not have created. Hello everyone. Hello everyone and welcome to today's Hello everyone and welcome to SpeakSeed Collective Initiative Day 4. Today we are not simply going to read a book, but we are going to read between its lines. Because sometimes a good book doesn't just give you information, it changes the question you were asking in the first place. And that is exactly what we are going to explore today. If we talk about the book, uh, today's book takes us into a very familiar conversation, and that is global warming. But instead of looking at it only as an environmental crisis, the author asks us to look at something deeper. What happens when environmental crisis becomes a question of inequality, development, and justice? And once you start looking at climate change through that lens, some very uncomfortable questions begin to appear. And if we talk about the core idea of it, we often talk about that climate change as if humanity is standing on one side and the problem is standing on the other side. Like we used to think that it is two kind of thing, but the reality is much more complicated. Different countries have contributed differently to global emissions, but different communities have different resources. And when disasters strike, not everyone begins from the same starting line. A wealthy family may be able to build a house or rebuild a house, but if you talk about a farmer who loses an entire crop, may not. A developed economy may invest billions in adaptation. A vulnerable community may simply have to survive the next flood, the next drought, or the next failed harvest. As we can see recently, the floods have been struck to the Assam. The question is no longer simply how do we stop climate change. The question is becomes who gets protected, who gets left behind, and who gets to decide. So now we're moving forward that this is where I want you to stop for a moment. You know, don't just ask, do I agree with the author, or ask something powerful, ask something more powerful. Why does the author want me to see the issue this way? What is being used, and whose voice is being heard? Whose voice might be missing? And what assumptions are hidden behind the argument? So these are the things we generally have to, give the emphasis upon that while reading a book. It's a two-way conversation between author and you as a reader. Whatever he trying to or she trying to convey with you, you need to first understand that, because active reading isn't about accepting everything a book tells to you. It is about learning how to think with the book and sometimes against it. And so before we close today, I want to leave you with one thought. Maybe the biggest lesson from this book is not about the climate change at all. Maybe it is about how we look at the problems, because a problem can look completely different depending on where you stand, from which perspective or from which lens you are seeing. and where you're standing, and then you are, analyzing that thing. From one side, climate change may look like an environmental crisis. From another, it may look like an economic crisis. For someone else, it may be a question of survival. And for someone who has little power, it may simply be the question of, will I able to rebuild my life after the next disaster? You can go through the multiple examples of this, current scenario like Assam, like North Bihar, Kashmir. So tonight, not just remember the facts, carry one questions with you. When we call something a global problem, are we also asking who is carrying the heaviest burden of it? Think about that, because tomorrow we are going one step deeper. You know, we will ask something even more uncomfortable. If the consequences are unequal, should the responsibility also be equal? Think about that. I will again repeat it. Should the responsibility also be equal? Thank you so much for listening me out. And this is my, fourth day of speaking in SpeakSeed Collective community, and I'm very much grateful for that, for this opportunity. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, don't just read, pause, question, and think. Thank you so much.